In February 1944, test pilot Andre Kochetkov found himself in the cockpit of a freshly assembled P-63 King Cobra at Bell Aircraft Corporation's factory in Buffalo, New York. American engineers were debating whether his upcoming flight would be his last. The aircraft, with serial number 406091, was brand new and destined for the Soviet Union. One of the two 400 fighters that would eventually cross the Boer effort in a conflict where America had doubts about the Soviets' ability to win, Kochetkov was 31 years old with over 2,000 flight hours under his belt. He was one of the Soviet Union's most experienced test pilots and had flown everything from outdated biplanes to captured German aircraft. The Soviet government had dispatched him to America specifically to ensure that the P-63 would not pose a risk to Russian pilots in the same way its predecessor, the P-39 Airacobra, sometimes did. The King Cobra bore a striking resemblance to the Airacobra, mid-mounted engine positioned behind the cockpit, tricycle landing gear, and car-style doors instead of a sliding canopy. However, the King Cobra was larger, heavier, and more powerful. Bell Aircraft had designed it to rectify all the issues with the P-39. It offered better high-altitude performance, a stronger airframe, increased speed, and enhanced firepower. Despite these improvements, when the U.S. Army Air Forces tested the aircraft in October 1943, they concluded that it was inferior to the P-51 Mustang. Consequently, America ordered 3 King Cobras and sent 72% of them to the Soviet Union under the Lend-Lease program. The United States never used these aircraft in combat themselves, but manufactured them for others to fight with. However, Kochetkov had uncovered a critical flaw during his testing that American engineers either missed or disregarded. The center of gravity issue was a major concern. Due to the engine's placement behind the pilot, there was significant mass at the rear of the aircraft. This design flaw meant that during certain flight conditions, particularly in spins, the center of gravity would shift too far back, rendering the aircraft uncontrollable and potentially deadly for pilots. Flat rotation with no escape. Despite the pilot's best efforts, the nose wouldn't lower. The controls ceased functioning, causing the aircraft to rotate horizontally and plummet earthward like a falling leaf. During his tests, Kochetkov had flown a P-63 to 12,000 feet, intentionally induced a spin, attempted every recovery method at his disposal, yet nothing succeeded. The aircraft sustained damage that should not have been possible under the given conditions. Upon examination by American engineers, structural flaws were discovered, leading them to conclude that Kochetkov must have made an error. However, Kochetkov maintained his stance, drawing on his extensive flying experience to argue that something was gravely wrong. The aircraft seemed intent on causing harm. Soviet pilots had been suffering fatal accidents in P-39 Airacobra flat spins for over a year, with these incidents occurring during training exercises rather than combat operations. The P-39 had earned an infamous reputation. Soviet pilots referred to it as the flying coffin, not due to its vulnerability in combat. In fact, at low altitudes, the P-39 performed quite admirably. Soviet aviators appreciated features like the nose-mounted cannon, robust construction, and sealed cockpit that kept them warm in temperatures down to 48 degrees. A single mistake or momentary lapse could cause the plane to enter a flat spin and plummet. By late 1943, the Soviet Air Force had received 4,600 P-39 Airacobras. Despite a 1943 agreement with America that restricted their use against Germany, these planes saw extensive service on the Eastern Front. The Soviets were losing ground in the West and needed all available fighters. Consequently, they covertly deployed P-39s to units engaged with Luftwaffe forces. Officially, these squadrons operated Soviet-built aircraft, but unofficially, they flew American Lend-Lease planes. German pilots took notice of this unusual equipment and began reporting sightings of unfamiliar aircraft. American-designed fighters equipped with mid-mounted engines and tricycle landing gear caused confusion among German pilots. Some believed they were seeing captured aircraft, while others speculated that the Americans had dispatched fighters to support Soviet forces. In reality, the Soviet Air Force was flouting the Lend-Lease agreement due to their critical need for these planes and the rapid loss of pilots in combat-induced spins. Issue wasn't a lack of knowledge regarding spin recovery procedures. Soviet pilots were well versed in the standard method: opposite rudder, forward stick, reduced throttle, and waiting for the nose to drop. This technique was effective on all domestically produced fighters such as the Yak-3, L-5, and MiG-3, all conventional tailwheel aircraft with a typical center of gravity. However, the P-39 was unique. Its mid-engine design and unconventional weight distribution posed challenges unfamiliar to Soviet pilots. The center of gravity was positioned further back than in any other Soviet fighter. Consequently, when a P-39 entered a spin, applying standard recovery techniques often exacerbated the situation. Pushing forward on the stick shifted some weight forward but not enough to counteract the rear-mounted engine's mass, causing the aircraft to spin even faster. Increased efforts at recovery could lead to structural failures as pilots struggled with excessive G-forces. The airframe might buckle and deform, resulting in fatalities. For those attempting an escape through the car, like cockpit doors, centrifugal force often prevented them from opening, leaving pilots trapped inside as they plummeted towards the ground. The most detrimental aspect was the psychological impact on the pilots. Soviet airmen were conditioned to be relentless in their attacks, exploiting the close-range combat advantages of their aircraft's superior low-altitude performance. However, operating the P-39 required a more cautious approach due to its inherent dangers. Any aggressive maneuver could prove fatal. This caution often resulted in missed opportunities and losses. The hesitation led to casualties both directly and indirectly. In December 1943, Bell Aircraft provided comprehensive specifications for the P-63 King Cobra to Moscow. Enthusiasm was high among Soviet officials as they believed this new model would rectify the flaws of the P-39. With a more powerful engine, improved performance at higher altitudes, and overall enhanced capabilities, the P-63 promised significant improvements. The Soviets were determined not to repeat past mistakes and insisted on sending their own specialists to America for thorough testing before committing to large-scale production runs. They wanted assurance that the P-63 would not endanger Soviet pilots in combat situations. Andre Kochetkov and engineer Theodore Supran were selected for this mission. Kochetkov, one of the most skilled test pilots within the Soviet Air Force, was renowned for his composure under pressure and willingness to rigorously assess an aircraft's limits. Supran, with extensive knowledge in structural integrity, aerodynamics, and flight dynamics, complemented Kochetkov's expertise perfectly. Their American hosts treated them with courtesy but lacked confidence in their expertise. To the seasoned American engineers, Kochet and Supran appeared as mere outsiders who could not comprehend contemporary aircraft design. Bell had extensive experience manufacturing fighter planes. They were confident in their capabilities. The P-63 had undergone rigorous testing and was deemed safe. Any issues encountered by Soviet pilots with the P-39 likely stemmed from inadequate training rather than inherent flaws in the plane's design. The Americans tasked Kochet with conducting a series of standard evaluation flights, including checking the control systems, testing the engine, verifying specifications, all routine procedures without any significant risks involved. During his initial test flights and basic maneuvers, everything appeared to be functioning normally. The aircraft demonstrated good speed and climb rates, along with responsive controls. However, Kochet observed an unusual characteristic. The plane felt slightly tail-heavy, as if there was more weight at the rear than optimal for stability. Undeterred, he requested permission to conduct spin tests. This request caused some hesitation among the Americans, who argued that such testing was unnecessary since the P-63 had already been cleared for production and its spin characteristics were known and deemed acceptable. Kochet remained firm, emphasizing that the Soviet Air Force required information about how the aircraft performed during spins, stating it was essential and non-negotiable. As it was a Kochet to proceed with caution and not to overexert the P-63, as it was a costly machine. At an altitude of 12,000 feet, Kochetkov initiated a spin deliberately by applying left rudder and aft stick while reducing power. The aircraft rolled to the left, and the nose plunged into a spin, following standard procedure with everything appearing normal. Kochetkov applied opposite rudder and forward stick, waiting for the nose to drop, but there was no response. Kochetkov could sense the aircraft's frame straining from the strain. The structural integrity seemed compromised. He attempted every conceivable remedy, neutral controls with opposite aileron input, altering power settings, nothing yielded results. At an altitude of 5,000 feet, he decided to eject but was interrupted by a sudden nositive. The aircraft spontaneously recovered from its spin as it descended further, and the airflow altered. Kochetkov attributed this recovery not to his actions, but to the loss of sufficient altitude. Upon returning to Buffalo, he shut down the engine and informed the American team that the P-63 had encountered a critical issue. Engineers conducted an inspection and discovered buckling in the rear fuselage due to bending under spin-induced loads. Initially, the Americans doubted his account, suspecting that Kochetkov must have made a mistake during the spin or applied incorrect techniques, thus surpassing the load limits. However, Kochetkov maintained that he had followed standard procedures without deviation. The issue was not with his technique but rather with the aircraft itself. Engineer Fodor Supran concurred after reviewing the P-63's design specifications and identifying the root cause, an improperly positioned center of gravity. When the plane was laden with fuel and ammunition, the skewed weight distribution made it prone to instability during spins. In a flat spin scenario, the tail-heavy configuration rendered conventional recovery methods ineffective. The only viable escape involved waiting for the aircraft to eventually self-recover at lower altitudes, a risky proposition unsuitable for combat scenarios. Soviet pilots could not afford to lose 5,000 feet each time they needed to recover from a spin. Doing so would put them in grave danger. Bell engineers re-evaluated Supran's findings and reluctantly confirmed his analysis. The P-63 indeed suffered from a center of gravity issue that was subtle yet significant. The challenge now lay in determining how best to address this problem. Redesigning the aircraft could push back production by months or even years, resulting in significant financial losses of millions of dollars and possibly ending the entire project. The U.S. Army Air Forces had already ruled out using the P-63 in combat scenarios, and if the Soviets also rejected it, Bell would be left with 3,000 unwanted aircraft, leading to a potential financial crisis for the company. To address this issue, engineers suggested a compromise, moving the center of gravity forward by relocating equipment and adding ballast. While this solution wouldn't fully resolve the problem, it would enhance safety by making spin recovery more predictable. Pilots would still need to exercise caution, but standard techniques could now be used to escape spins without waiting for automatic recovery. Kochetkov evaluated the modified P-63 and found that while the aircraft remained tail-heavy, the changes improved spin characteristics significantly. He reported that he was able to recover from a spin using conventional methods, which demonstrated an improvement in safety. Although it wasn't ideal, the modifications were deemed acceptable. Kochetkov advised Bell aircraft with one final recommendation: if a P-63 enters a flat spin and recovery is impossible, the pilot should immediately eject rather than attempting to control the aircraft further or wasting time. Upon hearing about Kochekhov's advice, the Irving Parachute Company expressed gratitude by sending him a commendation for any guidance that would help save pilots' lives. Neither Bell Aircraft nor the Soviet Air Force comprehended the full significance of Kochekhov's testing at the time. By uncovering the spin issue prior to mass production, Kochetkov potentially saved numerous Soviet pilots from fatal accidents. However, his contributions did not end there. Over the following 6 months, Kochetkov and Supran collaborated closely with Bell engineers to adapt the P-63 for use by the Soviets. They advised enhancing pilot armor since the P-63 originally featured only basic protection, whereas Soviet pilots were accustomed to heavier defenses. Given that missions often involve low-altitude flights over areas bristling with German anti-aircraft fire, additional armor was crucial for survival. Consequently, Bell incorporated an extra 68 kg of armor plate around the cockpit in the P-60A5 variant. Moreover, they suggested adding a hardpoint to the fuselage for bomb carriage. Although the initial design of the P-63 focused primarily on fighter capabilities, Soviet doctrine placed greater emphasis on ground attack missions. Therefore, the capacity to carry bombs or rockets was deemed essential. This modification was implemented in the A5 variant. In addition, they recommended installing underwing hardpoints to facilitate the attachment of fuel tanks or additional bombs. Given the vast expanse of the Eastern Front and the critical need for extended operational range, drop tanks became imperative. Bell subsequently incorporated these underwing hardpoints into the P-60A6 variant. Lastly, Kochetkov and Supran proposed relocating the 37mm cannon to the nose of the aircraft for improved performance. The initial design exhibited nose-heavy characteristics during firing, which were addressed by relocating the cannon forward and enhancing its ammunition capacity from 30 rounds to 588 rounds on the AIM variant. These modifications, suggested by Soviet input, significantly improved the aircraft's balance and operational capabilities. Bell Aircraft incorporated these changes because the Soviet Union was their primary customer. Approximately 72% of all P-63s were destined for the Soviet Air Force. Whenever the Soviets requested alterations, Bell promptly made them. By mid-1944, the P-63 had evolved into a collaborative American and Soviet design, with its initial concept originating in America but being refined according to Soviet requirements and built specifically for Soviet pilots. The journey commenced from Buffalo to Great Falls, Montana, covering more than 1,500 miles across the United States, under generally favorable weather conditions and straightforward navigation. From there, pilots proceeded north through Canada, following the Northwest Staging Route, a series of airfields constructed specifically for aircraft ferrying operations. This route spanned approximately 200 miles between each stop: Edmonton, Fort Nelson, Watson Lake, Whitehorse, with facilities providing fuel, basic maintenance, and shelter. However, weather conditions worsened as pilots advanced northward, with temperatures often dropping below -30°C even in the summer months. While clouds frequently obscured the mountainous terrain, visibility could plummet to zero within minutes. Many pilots had little experience flying under such conditions. The accident rate was notably high. From Whitehorse, pilots typically flew to Fairbanks, Alaska, which was notorious for being one of the most perilous legs of the journey. This route traversed some of North America's most isolated and rugged terrain, including mountain ranges, glaciers, and wilderness areas where survival was virtually impossible if a crash occurred. From there, they proceeded across the Bering Strait directly into Siberia. Although the strait was only 55 miles wide, it presented a terrifying prospect due to the lack of radio navigation aids and emergency landing sites. If an engine failed during this crossing, pilots faced frigid waters that could prove fatal within minutes. Pilots often flew in formations when possible, keeping watch over each other. In the event one aircraft went down, fellow pilots could mark its location and hope a rescue boat might reach it. This journey included stops at Anadyr, Samchan, and Yakutsk. Each segment was flown under challenging conditions with rudimentary airfields, limited maintenance facilities, and severe weather. Numerous aircraft sustained damage or were lost during this phase, yet most managed to complete the route successfully. The pilots who undertook these missions displayed remarkable skill and bravery, but received minimal recognition at the time and have garnered little attention since. By September 1, 1944, However, they did not immediately deploy them in combat. Instead, Soviet commanders wanted their pilots to undergo extensive training on these new aircraft before using them operationally. The P-63 was more powerful than anything previously flown by Soviet pilots, being faster and more complex, thus requiring thorough instruction. Training units were set up in the Soviet Far East with the stated aim of preparing for future operations against Japan. However, it was understood that some of these aircraft would eventually be employed against German forces in Western Europe as well. The 1943 agreement with America stipulated that P-63s could only be used against Japanese forces, but given the Soviet Union's desperate situation, they were prepared to utilize their available weapons wherever necessary. Soviet test pilots conducted evaluations of the P-63s by engaging in mock combat with captured German fighters. These tests pitted the P-63 against Messerschmitt Bfeser 9 G4s and Focke-Wulf 19A4s at high altitudes above 5,000 meters, where the German aircraft demonstrated a tactical advantage. Enhanced climbing speed and improved velocity made the P-63 less competitive at high altitudes compared to its rivals. However, at lower elevations under 3,000 meters, it excelled. Its outstanding horizontal maneuverability and superior roll rate gave it an edge over both German fighters in sustained turns. Notably, its roll rate of 110 XPs at 275 men T-7s surpassed that of the P-47 Thunderbolt, P-51 Mustang, and any aircraft flown by the Imperial Japanese Navy. Ideal for low-altitude dogfights, the P-60 proved exceptional in these conditions. Soviet pilots devised specific tactics tailored to its capabilities. They advised against engaging above 5,000 meters, instead leveraging the plane's strength at lower altitudes. Utilizing the rapid roll rate enabled quick directional changes, often leaving German fighters unable to respond. The 37 mm cannon should be used judiciously due to its low rate of fire. Reserve it for close-range engagements only. The 50 caliber machine guns are effective for suppressing enemy fire and leading targets accurately. Additionally, the robust armor allowed the P-63 to withstand significant damage that would likely incapacitate a Soviet-built aircraft, enabling continued combat effectiveness. Rely on the reliability and durability of the P-63 in flight operations. It was designed to withstand significant damage, maintain an aggressive stance, operate within close to short-range engagements, prevent German pilots from gaining altitude where they have a tactical advantage. Official documents indicated that these units flew P-39 Airacobra or Soviet-built variants, but German pilots reported encounters with aircraft larger and faster than the known Soviet types, more agile at low altitudes. The Germans speculated they were up against a new Soviet model. They were partially correct. The P-63 was indeed new, though it originated from American manufacturers in Buffalo, modified by Soviet test pilots and flown by Soviet pilots who weren't authorized to have them. Among these units was the 4th Guard Fighter Aviation Regiment, an elite force led by some of the Soviet Union's top aces. Officially, they were flying P-39 Airacobras, but according to accounts published years later by veterans, the regiment switched to P-63 King Cobras late in 1944. A pilot from this unit later wrote in his memoirs that the entire regiment had converted to P-63s and used them in combat over East Prussia, Poland, and during the final push on Berlin in April and May 1945. German records corroborate this. Luftwaffe pilot Hans-Ulrich Rudel, Germany's most decorated fighter ace, mentioned encountering American-type aircraft over the Courland Pocket early in 1945. He specifically noted Airacobras, King Cobras, and Bostons, describing them as fast, highly maneuverable, and particularly threatening at low altitudes. Rudel observed that American aircraft were handled differently from their Soviet counterparts. They exhibited more aggressive maneuvers and closer combat ranges. Although the tactics employed were characteristic of Soviet warfare, the planes themselves were distinctly American, made P-63 King Cobras. German anti-aircraft units also reported downing what seemed to be P-63s. Descriptions mentioned mid-wing fighters equipped with tricycle landing gear that appeared larger than P-39s. A few were recovered and analyzed, revealing unmistakable American insignia, serial numbers, and equipment despite being piloted by Soviet aviators in Soviet-controlled airspace. The Germans remained baffled. Were the Americans covertly assisting the Soviets? Had seized aircraft been reactivated, or was there some undisclosed agreement that allowed this practice? German intelligence never uncovered the truth. The Soviet Union maintained strict confidentiality regarding these operations. Official records showed only P-39s active on the Eastern Front, with no mention of P-63s. These aircraft were essentially invisible in official documents, Bantams flying over Europe under American construction, but operated by Soviet personnel who technically weren't authorized to use them. Official records corroborated this denial through a complete lack of documentation or mission reports. Yet some pilots retained vivid memories of these encounters, and so did their German counterparts. The proof of these events was hidden within personal narratives and informal recollections that lacked official confirmation. It is, however, undisputed that P-63 King Cobras were actively engaged in combat against Japan in August 1945. When the Soviet Union declared war on Japan on August 8, 1945, the Red Army initiated a large-scale offensive into Manchuria and northern Korea. Soviet air forces played a significant role in this invasion. Among the fighter aircraft utilized were P-63 King Cobras from both the 198th Fighter Aviation Division and the 245th Fighter Aviation Division. These units operated out of bases located in the Soviet Far East and conducted attacks on Japanese positions throughout Manchuria. On August 15, 1945, Lieutenant Myroslav Nichenko of the 17th Fighter Aviation Regiment achieved a notable victory when he shot down a Nakajima Ki-83 Hayabusa fighter over the waters off North Korea. This was the first confirmed aerial combat success for a P-63 King Cobra. The engagement took place at low altitude above the Sea of Japan. Nichenko's flight of 4 P-63s intercepted a formation of Japanese fighters escorting bombers. As they dived from higher altitudes to gain speed, the Soviet pilots engaged their targets head-on. Nichenko identified one Hayabusa fighter and opened fire with his 37mm cannon and 50 caliber machine guns. The Japanese aircraft disintegrated. Nichenko then reversed course and targeted another enemy fighter. His wingman alerted him to two more diving Japanese fighters approaching from above. Myroslav quickly rolled left, exploiting the P-63's superior maneuverability to meet a descending Japanese fighter head-on. Both pilots fired simultaneously. Nichenko's round struck the enemy aircraft's engine, while returning fire hit his left wing. Their missions included escorting bombers, providing close air support for ground troops, and assaulting enemy airfields as well as supply routes. The P-63 aircraft demonstrated its effectiveness in these roles, particularly with its exceptional low-altitude performance ideal for ground attacks. The 37mm cannon on the P-63 proved highly destructive against vulnerable targets such as trucks, trains, structures, and grounded aircraft. The armor protection of the plane allowed pilots to withstand light anti-aircraft fire while remaining operational. Japanese aviators soon learned to avoid engaging P-63s at low altitudes due to their superior maneuverability and firepower. When Japanese fighters attempted to exploit altitude advantages, Soviet pilots would refuse to climb, choosing instead to remain at lower levels where they could dominate the airspace. By August 23, 1945, when the Soviet offensive concluded, P-63 units had destroyed numerous Japanese aircraft both in the air and on the ground. However, precise numerical records are challenging to verify due to incomplete documentation from Soviet archives. The significance was unmistakable. The P-63 demonstrated its combat effectiveness not in American hands but rather in Soviet ones. Engaging in a conflict that America was not officially involved in and employing tactics it hadn't devised, the aircraft succeeded in roles beyond what had been anticipated by American strategists. Initially used for pilot training as they transitioned to jet fighters, the P-60's tricycle landing gear made it an excellent stepping stone. Unlike Soviet-built piston engine fighters that featured tailwheel configurations, the P-60C's tricycle gear was comparable to the MiG-15 jet, which posed a challenge for pilots accustomed to tailwheel aircraft. The P-60 served as a transitional platform where trainees could acclimate to tricycle landing gear techniques before transitioning to jets. This approach reduced accident rates and fatalities during the shift to jet aviation. Additionally, some Soviet units adapted P-63s into two-seat trainers by converting the weapons bay into a second cockpit, originally occupied by the 37mm cannon. These modified aircraft were designated as 63 UTI trainers. They offered enhanced safety compared to standard P-63 models because the forward-shifted center of gravity reduced spin tendencies, identified years earlier by Kochetkov. Soviet engineers adapted captured German drop tank designs to fit the P-63's underwing hardpoints. By 1950, when the P-63 was retired from Soviet service, it had been designated FRED by NATO intelligence agencies. Western analysts had long monitored Soviet King Cobra operations and were aware that the Soviets used these aircraft extensively, though they remained unaware of Kochetkov's testing, a secret deployment to Europe, and the extent of Soviet influence on the aircraft's development. The decision in October 1943 concluded that the P-63 was inferior to the P-51 Mustang due to its lower speed at high altitudes and shorter range compared to the already produced Mustang. The P-63 had no unique advantages over the Mustang, leading America to redirect its P-63 King Cobras elsewhere. However, they were later repurposed for a highly unconventional military program called Operation Pinball. This initiative aimed to train bomber gunners who manned tail, waist, and top turrets on B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-25 Mitchells. These crew members needed practical experience shooting at fast-moving enemy fighters using .50 caliber machine guns, a skill that could not be adequately trained for on the ground. To address this need, a unique solution was devised, converting P-63 King Cobras into aerial targets. This process involved stripping out all weapons and unnecessary equipment before covering the aircraft with nearly 2,164 pounds of specialized duralumin alloy armor plate. Sensors were installed beneath the armor to register bullet impacts, which would trigger a bright light mounted in the propeller hub whenever the plane was hit. The entire craft was then painted an eye-catching orange color for maximum visibility. Finally, a pilot was assigned to fly these heavily armored aircraft, while trainee gunners practiced their aim with specially designed frangible bullets. Frangible bullets consisted of compressed lead dust and plastic, designed to disintegrate into powder upon impact with armor plating, causing no penetration or harm beyond a mere puff of dust and a burst of light. In theory, this setup was entirely safe. The armor was robust enough to withstand .50 caliber rounds, while frangible bullets were engineered to break apart on contact. The pilot's safety seemed assured in these conditions. However, sitting inside a P-63 aircraft during combat with multiple machine gunners firing at it was an inherently terrifying experience. Pilots recounted that the sound of bullets hitting the armor resembled being trapped within a steel drum during a hailstorm. Constant metallic impacts creating a steady rhythm, bang, bang, bang. The plane would shake from the relentless barrage. Additionally, there were rare instances where standard, non-frangible ammunition found its way into the supply chain. These real bullets, with their steel cores and armor-piercing capabilities, posed a significant risk since they could penetrate the protective barrier. Those who undertook Operation Pinball missions were volunteers, seasoned pilots aware of the dangers involved. They donned heavy flight gear, including double-thick flight suits, extra body armor plates, bulletproof cockpit windows, and a steel mesh covering the air intake to enhance their safety. Steel enclosures shielded the exhaust outlets. The P-63 aircraft was essentially a flying tank, sluggish and cumbersome yet extraordinarily robust. Pilots who flew these planes gained significant respect among their peers. Handling a manned target while facing live enemy fire demanded nerves that most pilots lacked. This initiative operated from late 1943 until the conclusion of World War II. Countless bomber crew members honed their skills through Operation Pinball exercises involving RP-63 aircraft. Each training mission followed a precise protocol. And speeds, mimicking enemy fighter assaults. Gunners tracked the brightly colored orange craft and opened fire when it came within range. Sensors recorded every strike accurately. Instructors assessed gunner proficiency based on the frequency of sensor light flashes. Some drills involved several RP-63s approaching from different directions to replicate coordinated enemy fighter attacks. This allowed trainees to practice prioritizing targets, conserving ammunition, and coordinating with fellow crew members. The level of realism was unparalleled. No previous training had exposed gunners to engaging in actual moving aircraft. Additionally, the psychological impact was considerable. Awareness that a real pilot occupied the target prompted greater caution in shooting patterns. Trainees developed better trigger control and learned not to squander ammunition frivolously, but rather wait for optimal firing opportunities. The program was deemed exceptionally successful. Gunner accuracy saw a significant increase. Prior to Operation Pinball, the average hit rate for bomber gunners was below 2%. However, after undergoing training with RP-63s, their success rate soared above 8%, marking a quadrupling of effectiveness. This substantial improvement led to higher survival rates for bombers during combat missions. More enemy fighters were shot down by defensive gunners, and more bombers returned safely home. The pilots who operated the RP-63 aircraft faced one of the most perilous roles in military aviation. Each flight subjected their planes to hundreds of bullets, posing a serious risk that non-frangible ammunition might penetrate and endanger their lives. Every gunner trained meant another potential survivor on the battlefield, and each bomber making it home represented a crew saved from harm. The P-63 aircraft utilized in Operation Pinball were designated as RP-63A and RP-63. The RAR stood for Restricted. These planes could not be used for regular flight operations due to their heavy modifications. Their sole purpose was to serve as flying targets. Once the war concluded, many of these aircraft were decommissioned and scrapped. A few were restored back to standard P-63 models. A handful managed to escape destruction and found their way into museums or private collections. Unlike some other aircraft, the Bell P-63 King Cobra was not attributed to a single designer. It emerged as a corporate project developed by Bell Aircraft Corporation. Soviet test pilots refined it according to their requirements, adapting it for export purposes. Among those who made significant contributions to the P-60's safety and effectiveness is Andre Kochetkov. Returning to the Soviet Union late in 1944, Kochetkov continued his work as a test pilot through the remainder of World War II and into the early 1950s. His duties included testing Soviet jet fighters and evaluating captured German aircraft, while also mentoring younger pilots. Despite his critical role in improving the P-60's design, he never received public acknowledgement for his efforts. During the Cold War, Soviet policy was to minimize recognition of Lend-Lease assistance. Official records highlighted domestically produced aircraft with foreign-supplied models like the P-29 and P-613, and P-630 mentions or none at all. Kochetkov's identification of spin issues and subsequent design improvements were classified information. The modifications he suggested were credited to independent Soviet engineers, leaving no trace of his name in official documentation. Nevertheless, those who flew the P-63 knew the truth. Someone had made crucial changes that enhanced its safety, addressing the lethal flaws present in earlier models like the P-39, and ensuring that pilots would not face similar dangers. Though they didn't know the rescuer's identity, everyone was certain that someone had saved their lives. Fodor Suprun, an engineer who worked alongside Kochetkov, also returned to the Soviet Union and pursued a career in aviation engineering there. He contributed significantly to fighter development programs throughout the 1950s and 60s. His work on the P-63 was equally classified and overlooked, with his expertise in aerodynamics surpassing that of most American engineers at Bell Aircraft. Suprun's calculations regarding the center of gravity issue were spot on. The modifications he suggested proved both practical and effective. Nevertheless, his name never appeared in any Bell Aircraft documentation or American aviation history books. Pilots who flew P-63 King Cobras in combat are largely forgotten today. Lieutenant Miros Nishenko, who achieved the first confirmed kill against Japan with a P-63, survived the war. He continued flying fighters for the Soviet Air Force until the late 1940s. His name can be found in some Soviet military records, but he received no medals or public recognition beyond brief mentions in combat reports. Similarly, the identities of pilots from the 4th Guards Fighter Aviation Regiment remain unknown. These aviators reportedly flew P-63s over Berlin, yet their names don't appear anywhere in official documents. If they existed and converted to King Cobras in 1944, as some claim, their story may have faded with them. Official Soviet records deny the occurrence entirely, while Western historians consider it unconfirmed. German sources hint at its possibility but lack concrete proof. The reality likely lies somewhere between these conflicting accounts. It is likely that some P-63s saw action in Europe, but probably not the entire 4th Guard Regiment. Perhaps only a small number of planes and pilots were involved, flying missions that were never officially recorded, and earning victories attributed to other aircraft types. The Soviet Union kept this deception alive for many years. Even after Cold War archives were opened, information about P-63 usage remained incomplete. Bell Aircraft Corporation manufactured 3 30-30 King Cobras between October 1943 and December 1945. Of these, at least 2 30-1945 went to the Soviet Union, though some sources claim up to 2 37-2. The precise number is uncertain due to losses during transit. In 1945, 11 to the Free French Air Force. However, they arrived too late for World War II combat and instead saw action in the First Indochina War in the late 1940s. The French used them primarily for ground attack and close. A few P-63s remained in U.S. service for testing, while NASA utilized several for high-speed flight research. Racing enthusiasts also modified some P-63s for unlimited air racing, bitting them with clipped wings and custom paint schemes. Some racers achieved success, while others crashed during competition. One famous racing aircraft was Tipsy Miss, flown by John Sandberg, painted in bright orange, white, and black. Throughout the 1980s, it participated in unlimited racing competitions before being sold to a European pilot who tragically lost his life when the aircraft crashed in 1990. Another notable King Cobra racer, known as Crazy Horse Campgrounds, underwent extensive modifications and is considered one of the most altered P-63 models ever created. This particular aircraft met its demise during a test flight in 1972 when it crashed into the ocean, claiming the pilot's life. Currently, only around 20 P-63 King Cobras still exist worldwide. Most are housed in museums, while a handful remain operational and participate in air shows. A significant loss occurred on November 12, 222, at the Wings Over Dallas event in Texas, when a P-63 King Cobra, registered as NIX S763 and operated by the Commemorative Air Force with Craig Hutnane at the controls, collided mid-air with a Boeing B-7G Flying Fortress during a demonstration. The collision resulted in the deaths of Hutnane, along with 5 other individuals aboard the B-17. This tragic accident deeply affected the warbird community and prompted stricter safety measures to be implemented at air shows. Regarding the question posed in the title, whether the P-63 King Cobra was America's finest World War II dogfighter, the answer is not straightforward. It never saw combat in U.S. service, thus lacking operational data. The U.S. Army Air Forces opted for the P-51 Mustang due to its superior range and altitude performance, alongside simpler logistical requirements. For missions escorting bombers deep into Germany, the Mustang was indeed a better choice. However, the situation shifts when examining the P-63's performance in Soviet hands. In this context, the aircraft demonstrated exceptional effectiveness at lower altitudes. Its superior roll rate, combined with excellent maneuverability and substantial firepower, made it a formidable tool. Additionally, its robust construction was well suited for the combat environment experienced by Soviet forces. For engagements involving low-altitude dogfights and ground attacks, the P-63 excelled. Was it the best option available? This assessment depends on various criteria such as mission type and environmental conditions. All altitude scenarios above 20,000 feet, the P-63 faltered compared to aircraft like the P-51 Mustang and P-47 Thunderbolt due to inferior engine performance. For long-range escort missions, its limited fuel capacity, even with drop tanks, was a significant drawback. Similarly, for bomber interception, the 37mm cannon's low rate of fire posed challenges. However, at lower altitudes below 10,000 feet, the P-60 excelled once again. It could outmaneuver most German fighters and outperform Japanese aircraft in terms of roll rates. Its durability allowed it to withstand damage that would typically destroy less robust planes. Given the missions flown by Soviet forces, the P-63 was among the top fighter options available. While not flawless, its spin characteristics were notably hazardous. It provided an exceptional level of performance for its intended use. Despite Kochev's adjustments, the center of gravity remained problematic. Pilots needed to exercise caution, but with thorough training and strategic approaches, the P-63 became a formidable combat aircraft. The King Cobra's robust armor and sturdy construction saved many lives. Surviving pilots often attributed their survival to the plane's resilience. Its longevity is further testament to its effectiveness. The Soviet Air Force continued to use P-60s until 1950, 5 years after World War II ended. The P-63 was retained because of its utility in training pilots for jets, maintaining combat readiness, and supporting operations in the Far East. This aircraft fulfilled Soviet requirements better than many domestically designed counterparts. Aviation history is often shaped by such practical contributions rather than through heroic aces or decisive battles. It involves test pilots and engineers who identify critical issues and address them before they become fatal. Andre Kochetkov never became a flying ace nor achieved spectacular victories. He didn't receive any medals or public accolades. Instead, he pushed the P-63 King Cobra to its limits, identified a dangerous design flaw, and insisted on correcting it even when others doubted him. This likely saved more lives than any individual fighter pilot ever did. Wartime innovation does not typically stem from official programs or governmental committees. Rather, it arises from individuals like Kochet, who notice problems that others overlook and have the determination to challenge established norms, despite opposition. Bell Aircraft's engineers declared the P-63 as safe, backed by their calculations and testing results. However, Kochet had a different perspective based on his first-hand experience with the aircraft. He placed greater trust in his own hands and years of flying expertise, rather than relying solely on numerical data. As it turned out, Kochet was correct. The tale of the P-63 King Cobra highlights collaboration between diverse cultures and political entities during World War II, when America and the Soviet Union were forced into an alliance despite their mutual distrust. This cooperation included American engineering prowess combined with Soviet testing and joint modifications, resulting in a practical solution to shared challenges. Although not without its complications, this partnership yielded significant benefits. The P-63 became a more suitable aircraft for Soviet pilots than anything they could have developed independently at that time. This achievement was largely due to the determination of test pilot Andre Kochetkov, who refused to endorse an unsafe aircraft. If you found this story intriguing, please take a moment to like and share it on social media platforms so we can continue uncovering lesser-known narratives from World War II. Don't forget to subscribe for more untold historical accounts that deserve recognition. Your feedback is also valuable. Feel free to leave your thoughts about the P-63 King Cobra in the comments section below. Do you think it was superior to other American fighter planes like the Mustang or Thunderbolt? Thanks for viewing and thanks for preserving these tales.